the Conquer Your Battlefield podcast, where we come together to discuss some of the more significant struggles and metaphorical battlefields that we've faced along our journeys and share some insight on how we've conquered them. I am JD McGibney, and today I'll be chatting with the poetic, artistic, entrepreneurial, funny, and compassionate Adriana Green, founder of the Visio Magazine and the AudioViso Podcast. How you doing, Adriana?
Oh, I'm doing great. That was a fabulous introduction. Thank you. My hat's not going to fit tomorrow. My head is so big.
Well, listen, you're a fabulous person, so you needed a fabulous introduction. Today, we are going to be talking about borderline personality disorder, also referred to as BPD for short. According to the book, I Hate You, Don't Leave Me, about 18 million people in the United States alone, roughly about 6% of the entire population, exhibit primary symptoms of BPD. There are 9 criteria associated with it, and a person has to exhibit a minimum of 5 of them in order to be diagnosed. And of all the people in the US that seek psychiatric treatment, between 15% and 25% of them are diagnosed with BPD, making it the most common personality disorder. For the longest time, it was thought that BPD affected mainly women, but as research continues, it is believed that it afflicts men and women about evenly. It's just that men are more likely to be misdiagnosed with things like PTSD, depression, or labeled with as antisocial. So Adriana, you are very vocal and public with the fact that you have borderline personality disorder, which in itself is extremely brave. So thank you very much for being here and talking about it today.
Yeah.
What is it? What is it like for? What was it like for you when you first recognized that this was part of your life, and how did recognizing it come to help you begin to conquer it?
Well, that's a good question. I first came to recognize BPD within myself when I was 9 years old.
Really?
Because, yeah, I was very perceptive and a very strange child. And I just always felt like I was a bird floating above. I don't know. Everything felt very objective. I knew I was different. And then when I was around 13 years old, I began to understand the internet more on how to do Google searches. And that's when I was really, really into researching borderline. And at the time, there was really no research. Let's say it was like 2007, 2006, I want to say around then. And really, there's only been a lot of research done on it, or rather the stigmatization has gone down in the last 5 years. And so,
well, even just research in general, like, just from what I've read as well, is that most of the more significant finds have been within, like you said, the last 5 to 10 years, because a lot of times
precisely.
it's because there's just so much going on with BPD. It's often mislabeled as different things, so people aren't as perceptive with the fact that it is its own specific ailment.
Yeah. So just to finish your first question, so yeah, I was cognizant of it for a long time, but because I was cognizant of it for a long time, and when you're able to understand the terminology of your mental illness, people think you've done enough studying just to get attention. And so you can know a lot about it, but you can't bring that to a doctor, because then the doctor will say, how do you know all that? You're just saying that because you want to have those things. And that's especially common for females as well, because you're just emotional. And recognizing it actually didn't catalyze a great recovery process. It catalyzed a deep turbulence and complete shifting of the poles in my life. It was a complete 180 and not a positive one. And why there is so much, why there's only been so much research in the public being cognizant of it in the last decade. Why there wasn't any urgency towards understanding it is because people with borderline disorder or personality disorder are very annoying and very aggressive. And it's easier to treat people in group who are crying than who are angry. And so we've actually been marginalized and isolated because people don't go to work. They don't become social support workers to deal with angry people screaming and spitting in the face. they do it to help sad, depressed people. And even though borderlines are sad and still depressed, they have amygdala dysregulation. It's an actual, it's an over functioning of an amygdala, a part of the body that we can't go in and control. And so we're definitely, the stigma is such that I remember being at a doctor's office trying to get help for group therapy, and I was talking to the doctor, and she left, and outside of the room I heard, "Oh, Jesus Christ, she's definitely borderline." And they complain about you. So as a borderline, if you don't have intelligence on your side, you're stuck in hospitals. You're stuck in a cycle. If you're stuck in, we deserve to have happiness. And the people that you know in your life who've been severely affected with borderline, you can tell that they're stuck in a vicious cycle, and they're beautiful people, and you wish that you could pull them out, but at the same time, people will just make you drown with them if they don't want to be saved. And so if you don't have the self-awareness or that ability to be objective about, it basically comes down to shadow work. But if you don't understand how the world sees you when you have borderline, then I find that it's very difficult.
Well, it sounds like one of your strongest attributes in conquering this whole thing is the fact that you're very self-aware, but you're also very aware of the world around you amidst all of what's going on emotionally, which, from what I understand and from what I've seen, like firsthand, for like any kind of, mental health struggle, being able to like remove yourself mentally from the emotional, trauma in any situation is just difficult. So the fact that you're able to like basically have those three different like outlooks all at once, I think that's a very strong trait.
Thank you. Yeah, I've always been known to being able to see three sides of the coin. That's been a common trait all throughout my life.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a really good point when you say, like, when you first went to go see like a doctor, that is a very common thing, is where like therapists and doctors in general tend to have that abrasive approach to people who have BPD, which right there is, an issue, because it's something that can be really chaotic and needs the help of a professional. But if you have people who are, literally there as professionals to help, and they have that like abrasive, approach, it makes it so that people who have BPD are, more reluctant to actually go and seek that, because you don't want to feel judged, you don't want to feel criticized. And it's like, if the person who is supposed to be helping you is giving you that, it makes it very difficult.
Precisely, it is very difficult, and because BPD lies on a spectrum, and in the categorization of personality disorders, it falls in cluster B. So cluster B, you have your histrionics, you have your narcissistics, you have your borderlines, and you have your antisocials. Those are all there's like OCD personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and lots of others. So borderline is within cluster B. So you can have like symptoms and subtypes of others. So for example, my special little soup recipe is like, yeah, I have borderline, whatever, but I have schizoid systems, I'm schizotypical, and I'm antisocial. So I'm more anti-authoritarian. I can't hold down a job very easily. There's lots of borderlines who are very successful because they have 3 out of the 9 or 4 out of the 9 symptoms. When you have 9 out of the 9 symptoms, it becomes, which I do, it becomes a interesting life.
It's a lot to juggle.
Well, actually, the only one, and you might have to put a trigger warning on this, but I actually have 8 out of 9. My self-harm has never included cutting. It involves anger. So when people self-harm in a way that's physical, like with the cutting, whatever, that's a way to get your pain out, because there's so much pain, you need to relocate your pain to another area. I totally understand it. It's not something to judge. It's a real thing that's happening in the brain. However, for me, that has never happened, either because I'm too anxious or too narcissistic, because I don't really want to do that to myself. I get angry. and I let the rage out. And it's not in anybody's face. It's not in, it's to myself in a corner, but it's akin to, it's a form of self-harm, because there's only so much you can do that, to your body.
Yeah, and I can
but
only
I
imagine
actually,
that
yeah.
like having that intense amount of emotion, that intense amount of anger, or that intense amount of like darkness needing a release, I feel like it's a very human thing to have, take an
Yeah.
emotion that we can't necessarily process in the moment and turn it into a physical thing, whether it's, like if it's anger, you're getting into a fist fight with somebody, or like you said, like some people with BPD have to cut themselves because they have to give it a physical form. Or let's say, it's an artist who has depression and they make a sculpture. They need to give it a physical form in order to understand and make sense of what it is that they're feeling.
Yeah, precisely. And sometimes it's more insidious and harmful. And it can be as joyous as a painting or a photograph or a poem. But unfortunately for many, the thing is, people with borderline disability, it's hard. With BPD, they're not robots, they are humans. So when someone says, oh, I experienced that too, I might be BPD, it's like, no, that's the worst thing you could say. You don't know the nuances, the intricacies, the real difficulties that we actually face. If we were to be observed like Big Brother, you would be like, oh, yeah, they don't know what they're doing.
And then you can have like an emotional switch, like literally like that too, which
every 15 minutes.
Which
makes it different than bipolar, because with bipolar, your moods, you can have like a phase for like a week or two, whatever. With borderline, it's about every 15-20 minutes you feel a physical shift coming on. You have to control it. Even throughout this interview, I'll have about 4 of them where I'll be like, whoa, okay, I'm back.
Yeah, I just having a normally regulated emotional shift can be tiring. Just the way you're describing it like that, I can only imagine like the
like
physical
running a marathon.
Energy. It sounds like it. Like you
so
must.
Skinny.
I imagine that if you were to actually run like an actual marathon, you would just like blow everyone out of the water because you're like, yeah, no, I've been practicing for years.
Running away from my demons. You're going pretty quick. Yeah, pretty much. But you know Hercules, you know how Zeus put all the Titans down there? He's like, yo, chill. Or not the Titans, but you know what I mean, the monsters?
Oh yeah, the Titans.
He put them in cages. Yeah, I put them underneath. He's like, hang out down there. And like, that's what it feels like. Every day you wake up with borderline, you're like, yo, down there in the cellar.
You're like, no, not today.
Live. Not today, demons. Get out of town. Actually, and I'm going to let you continue. But do you mind if I just read something about anger and the amygdala?
Oh, yeah,
please. Wraps up?
Share it, yes.
Okay. I'll try to skim. In people who have BPD, the amygdala is very active, almost too active, so the emotional responses that arise tend to be big. If you have a big emotional response, the behaviors that arrive from that response also tend to be big. For example, imagine that your significant other promised to be home by 7, and because of work or traffic, got there 15 minutes late. You start to get angry as each minute passes, and then by the time he gets home, the anger has boiled over and you blast him. If you were to stand back and think about it, you would likely say that your reaction to his being 15 minutes late was an overreaction. However, given your powerful emotional response, your behavior seems justified in that moment. In BPD, you can blame this response on your overactive, under-controlled amygdala. The amygdala also plays an important role in the making of memories. In particular, memories tied to strong emotions. And this is the critical function that, under normal circumstances, would work like this. Imagine that you go up to an unfamiliar dog that's wandering in the park, and the dog growls at you and then bites you. You experience fear, and the memory is registered and locked in, making it less likely that you will go up to strange dogs in the future. From an evolutionary perspective, the amygdala would have helped keep us away from all sorts of dangers like saber-toothed tigers. In BPD, this response is magnified, and then rather than their serving simply as a warning, the memories paired with strong emotions play over and over, causing suffering even after the danger has passed. So that's, you can edit that to like make it shorter if you want.
No, it's all good. I'm
But
gonna leave that in there. You know,
yeah,
it gives a lot of insight, and it's interesting to see like how certain things have, you know, developed biologically, you know, through evolution just to keep us alive. But the fact that we've become so complex, like emotionally and like intellectually, like you have these, you know, these bodily, you know, these body parts, these organs, these bodily functions that were designed to keep us alive, and like you said, stop us from being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. And like,
yeah,
there's just so much more for it to take in now. And sometimes you have, you know, stuff like this where like you have something that's like hyperactive, and
that's exactly it.
and it's interesting that like, at least from what I've read in my own research, BPD can either be caused through something that's biological, it could be something that's like learned from like childhood and then going into adolescence, or there could be a combination of both, basically
Yes.
nature and or nurture. So the fact that
Yes.
there are so many different factors in what causes BPD, like that alone, I think is fascinating to understand.
Of course. BPD is actually, I think, about 60% genes, 40% nurture, because even the debate of nurture versus nature is hot and heavy, and biologists are like, no, we're good. We don't know. Like, we can't. And so for me to say it's one of the, it's difficult, definitely, to differentiate the two. But as for genetics, genes account for 69% of the symptoms of BPD, and environmental factors account for 31% of receiving symptoms. And already, if you're predisposed to it, of course, then it's a bigger.
Well, yeah. I guess that makes sense, because that would explain why you could, you know, you theoretically have, you know, a group of siblings who grew up in the same house, the same parents, and had literally the same upbringing, have, you know, completely different personalities.
It's true, and actually, I can touch more on that. Actually,
please.
Little, like, science experiment. Not to talk too much about my family, but my father, I was married before he married my mother, and he had children. Mm-hmm. So I have older half brothers and sisters, and they didn't live with my father; they lived with the mother. Okay. And eventually, I was born. And I lived with. Yeah, thank you. Hello, I was the last one. My father's like, dear God. So, but I got to live with them all my life. And just looking at the differences in the siblings, they received borderline. I don't know where, but like my half brother was misdiagnosed in the 90s with multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder.
Gotcha.
But it turned out to just be borderline.
And I'm assuming that what caused the misdiagnosis was the drastic shift in emotion so quickly. Am I correct?
I also think it was the shift in education, because it was the early 90s. And then his diagnosis got changed when he was much older.
Oh, yeah, because I think, wasn't it in, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't it in the 90s where like borderline started really getting some like attention, where people are like, this is a thing?
Yeah, because of Marsha, I forget. I want to say her name is Marsha Linham. I definitely could be wrong, so please fact check me, but she's the one who created the now heavily used and implemented DBT therapy program, specifically made for people with borderline, because people, people with depression and anxiety, you don't have to have borderline to have depression and anxiety, but if you have depression and anxiety, you probably have borderline. Like, I don't know how to say it, and so a lot of the times, and in my own experience, you're put into group therapy with people who don't fully understand your drastic and extreme experiences with mental health. So I was put into a group with, like, no one had borderline, they all had depression or anxiety, and I had a hard time retaining the material, because there is material that is broad enough to, CBT, breathing exercises, ride the wave, fighting your battles, that's all inclusive. But when it comes to borderline, it's a specific regimen that needs to be followed. And so my point being is that, yes, because of that, because of the brain that Marsha had, she shone quite a light on BPD that allowed the destigmatization of it up until now. Yeah.
Well, I I'm glad that we are now at a point where, this is definitely coming to more light. There's more light being shown on, the topic of borderline personality disorder, and the fact that it's being recognized as its own separate thing, and it's not just being lumped together as like, this type of depression or like this type of anxiety. It's starting to really get the proper, therapy that that is needed.
Precisely, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I was about to ask, how is it that you started to work through having it? Because you had said at the beginning of the interview that you said once you realized like you had it and that it was part of your life, that you said it didn't go towards getting better right away. You said it got worse for you. So how is it that you were able to turn that around into, being the positive, smiley, optimistic person sitting in front of me?
That's a very good question. And I think it happened because I willed it to happen. You have to want it bad enough. Because that's the thing. Borderline and the depression and the apathy that comes with it can begin to grow on you like vines until it suffocates you. It's a deadly illness, and the suicide rate is high. And I've lost friends to it. So it's a matter of, it depends on your situation as well. There's a lot of people who I know with borderline that have the financial resources and the family support that keeps them floating. Even though they're suffering, they're still, they have a life support and reach. I unfortunately got a diagnosis surrounding the time when so many events in my life were surrounding me that I had nothing to hold on to. And because of that, I did a lot of the coming out of that darkness on my own.
How old were you when you got the diagnosis?
Late. I was 23. And I could have used a lot of help before, but 23 is definitely a late age, considering I knew since I was 9 and no one listened or believed.
That is definitely a long period of having to not have anyone listen to you.
Yeah, and that's and they're like, why do you have borderline? It's probably because no one listened to me. It's like the anger builds up. It's like I was a smart kid and no one listened to me. No one listened to me. No one takes you serious. And if you're perceptive enough to perceive that, but rather, so it takes, I think when I was about 5, I always knew I had something inside of me. And I think it was the grandiose egoism that comes from having a severe mental illness. But I knew that even if I didn't have a mental illness, there is still something inside of me that's supposed to be out. To say I'm special, perhaps, but no, it's the egoism that I feel all artists and writers need to have. It's a healthy dose of, I can do this. I need to. So the biggest thing throughout my whole life has been, I'm excited to see what's on the other side of this. You have to be excited.
Do you feel that like you're a poet, you're a writer, you're a painter, you're a musician? Do you feel that these artistic outlets have helped you with coping and getting through some of like the more difficult experiences that you've had with BPD?
So that is a really emotional question for me, actually, because as a podcast interviewer myself, I interview a lot of artists and musicians, and I ask them that similar question, and their answers are good, but I just can never really relate to a lot of them. And I don't know how that sounds.
It's totally understandable. I think that question is a very difficult question to answer because the answer is so unique to each individual person answering it.
Yeah, because it just makes me realize, like, I honestly, like, if I didn't have writing in my life, I wouldn't be, I can't explain it. It's like drinking water. I need to do, like, I can't, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like if I don't play the piano, I feel like I'm suffocating.
It feels like you have this buildup of something that just needs to be let out. And
yeah, like
when you
I'm
finally get to do it,
channeling.
what are you gonna say?
Yeah, like I'm channeling some like psychedelic psychobabble that's coming from the ether that's using me to like be processed, which I know is crazy, and I know it's not true, but that's what it feels like.
Listen, anyone that's an artist that's listening to this or watching this right now is gonna be like, I get it, because it totally,
Right?
it's exactly how it feels. You know, it's I personally believe that we are emotional, illogical creatures that try to be as logical as possible, but we forget the fact that we have these emotions which are completely illogical. And so we try to express ourselves through art by creating our own, rules that have some sort of logic and flow and like reason to them, to give some sort of like physical representation to something that shouldn't make sense, but totally makes sense.
Precisely. But even to say like what did you say? What did you say? Opposite or the?
What was that? You cut out for a second.
You said something and I wanted to comment on it, but it completely slipped my mind. Oh, the opposite. And here's the thing. That's a kind of a pop culture myth. The opposite of I lost it again. No, JD, no.
It's over there.
Oh, wait, no, let me write it down. Wait, hold on. And then I won't forget it. Okay, now I can speak. There's 3 very common myths in pop culture. 1, that we only use 10% of our brain. That is nonsense. That is a lie. That a quote on Instagram told you, if we only ever use 10% of our brain, then I don't know, through evolution, don't you think that the 90% other part of our brain would, I don't know, atrophy and then not be usable? Okay, anyways.
I think they only use that one so they can make the movie Limitless.
It's dumb. The second one, okay. I checked with Darwin, he agrees. He's like, yeah, it would hey. Okay.
Hey, yo, whoa.
Hey, yo. No. The second one being there's no such thing, or common sense isn't so common. No, it's not that common sense isn't so common. Common sense doesn't exist at all. It just doesn't exist for anybody. It's relative. It doesn't matter. And the third one that's actually pertaining to this conversation, people in the comments are going to be like, who does she think she is? Anyways.
Why is she talking about buses?
Yeah. Anyways, no, I don't want to be misogynistic. The third one is emotion and logic are not opposites, but rather synonyms and counterparts.
Care to go into further detail with that one?
Well, I'm not a doctor, so like
this is we'll preface this part of the conversation with, this is a philosophical debate.
Yeah, it's a very cerebral, heady, philosophical one. Okay, strap yourself in.
All right.
I don't know. It's just it's just like because here we go, and I could be wrong again. I believe that the premise or the idea behind someone's saying or thinking that the antithesis of emotion is logic comes from a very patriarchal ideology of like way of seeing the world. Because, and I'm not saying you think like this or whatever, I'm just shooting the shit, you know what I mean? But logic is usually considered a masculine trait and emotion is usually considered a feminine trait. And females and males are considered opposites. Considered in the you know what I mean, in the textbooks, whatever, opposites. And so it's not, I don't think it's consciously used in that manner with that intention, but I think it derives from that, to say that you could either be emotional or you could be logical.
I think that's more of a, I think it's more of a Western culture kind of thing, because you know, you do have cultures, you know, throughout history who have had very strong, you know, matriarchal societies where like women had more of a guiding role and weren't just meant to be subservient. But I do agree that, you know, in Western culture, that is a big issue. That's why you have a lot of things where, like, you know, like the past like 10 years or so, you had like the whole questioning the whole man up philosophy and saying, hey, you know,
of course,
men have feelings as well. It's not just they're fucking stone. You know, I think I've actually had a similar conversation to this with a friend of mine, and the topic basically was just the way men and women approach things is that men tend to be more logical and women tend to be more emotional. But I don't think that's necessarily a biological thing. I think it's more of like a product of how our society is, where like we're taught from the time we like pop out of the womb, hey, you have to be like this and you have to be like this. So it's like, are we naturally like that? Or are we like taught to be like that? And I think that's a really good point that you're bringing up, is the fact that, like, you know, we're human beings. We are both logical and emotional, whether we're a male, female, hermaphrodite, somewhere in between. Like,
always said that.
It's, and I think emotions were meant more of just like to be there initially when we didn't really have, you know, higher functioning brains, to this way they can keep us alive. When you were talking about like the amygdala, it's like, hey, we have, you know, basic fear response to like, I'm not going to get eaten by that giant bear sloth thing because I don't feel like I want to be eaten.
But imagine if we didn't have emotion. Okay, let's say that emotion is the antithesis of logic. Let's just say, for conversation's sake, it is the opposite. Emotion
Devil's
is
advocate.
emotion. Let's just say. And we're talking primitive, as you were just saying, or primitive times.
Caveman, gotcha.
Hunting, gathering needs. Gotcha. Okay, we're on it. We're on the page. Don't you think that if there was just logic, they would not be able to see spirits and ancestors in the fire, in the flames? Do you think without emotion, they would lack imagination? Do you think the Egyptians would be able to perceive the sun as raw?
I agree with that 100%. I think
that, you know what I mean?
I think that logic, this is philosophically speaking, because I am in no way a professional. I think logic is just a heightened addition to emotions, where we started to recognize things where like we could be like, oh, I am on, this is an electronical device that I am on. Logically speaking, it needs electricity in order to run. Like stuff like that, where it's able to like make deductive reasoning. Where,
of course, because at the end of the day, it does come down to semantics too. It's just a good old hearty, good English fashioned word. Not English, but you know what I mean? Like
language.
Words. It's words have definitions, and definitions of things have words for a reason. And so we had to at least put a word to the feeling of what we're having. What is this opposite of emotion? It must be logic. Whatever.
And then you have the magical language of Yiddish, which has one word that means an entire paragraph worth of emotion.
It's amazing. I love that.
Oh God, my dad. This is a sidetrack. My dad has a saying: if you don't have anything nice to say it in Yiddish.
Yeah. Hey. Say in a foreign language. Yeah. That's great.
But I digress. Back to you.
Of course. Well, no, I think what you're saying is wonderful. Yeah. Any other questions about borderline?
Well, how about, is there anything that you would like to share with people in regards to say they have BPD? How do you have any advice for people in what to do moving forward? Say if they haven't necessarily gone out to get that professional help just yet, like they're realizing something's not exactly right and they're leaning towards it might be BPD. Like, do you have any advice for people in that situation?
Of course. That is a tricky situation to be in, because the common thing with borderline is you relive the same day over and over again. You kind of live out the movie Groundhog Day. So you could wake up one morning and think to yourself, I'm going to do it. It's going to get done. And the next day, you think the same thing, and you think, and it's just not happening. And then further you sink into that, it's hard to see the forest through the trees.
Gotcha.
So I think if you haven't already gotten help, if you're not already seeking DBT therapy, if you're not already seeking a therapist, if you don't have that support system, if you are dealing with it as like a solo adventure, the best thing to do is to get over the embarrassment about reading about yourself, get over finding out all the bad things that you're going to read some shitty stuff, and it's going to confirm everything that all your ex-boyfriends and all your friends have said to you, and you're not going to want to believe it, but you need to believe it. Shadow work, of course, if you're into spirituality, shadow work is a great way to integrate group therapy if you're finding it, if you're resisting it, you're finding it hard.
Can you explain what shadow therapy is?
So shadow work is essentially, it's like a Western washed way of describing how to integrate. All humans have good one, and you are also around toxic people. No one's perfect. Everyone hears that. No one's perfect. And whenever you get annoyed by what somebody else is doing, you're like, I fucking hate when they do that. Stop chewing like that. You know what? Like those little tiny weird things that you have no right getting mad over.
Like people that slurp when they're eating soup.
Yeah, and you're just like, who raised you, wolves? And everything is just, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That is actually one, because of the voices in your past that have degraded you and taunted you, but also because of what you do to others and what you yourself. It's the things that you do that other people are annoyed by that you don't realize. And it's like people who take 1 week of psychology like to describe as projecting, where you just go around and you like project your issues on everyone because you just need a hug kind of thing. So shadow work is knowing that, especially with borderline, that you, as much as you want to be justified in saying, I can call my boyfriend 100 times at work, you can't. And it's not normal. And you shouldn't do it. And it's all and you know what I mean? And because borderline keeps you trapped in believing that those things, because it's all you know. You have to have compassion for yourself. And the biggest thing is being able to forgive yourself. Get rid of the guilt. Get rid of all the awful things, like people calling you crazy, saying you're like all of that, and just forgive yourself for not knowing better at the time. Because especially with borderline, there's hardly any research. And if you're deep down in the mud, you're not going to be searching for the internet to call you evil. You're not going to be seeking that. And so you have to just get over that hump.
Well, I think, the positive is that I think people are starting to realize that more, like really recently, is the fact that like doesn't matter what you're going through, like no one's innately evil unless you're like, unless you're Hitler,
But that's the thing. And I have personal experience with being called evil because of someone reacting to me reacting because of my daughter. And so what do you do with that?
Going off of that, do you have any advice for people that don't have BPD but might have someone in their lives that does have BPD? How is it, do you feel, what advice would you give to them on how to basically react when someone's having like a difficult moment? Or how do you feel the people who how do you feel that they should approach people with BPD?
So if the person with BPD is neutral and you just meet them at a coffee shop, or with BPD as neutral, you meet them at a coffee shop and you just like hanging out and you find out that they have it, treat them like you would anyone else, because they're not going to like yell at you all of a sudden. Just hang out with them. They're literally the same. They just like are very perceptive and very sensitive. They're exactly the same. They're
like, yo, you want the milk? Want some sugar? You're good.
Yeah, it's just like instead of getting embarrassed, we get humiliated. Instead of getting happy, we get fucking ecstatic. It's just we're just a little different, but just normal. But also be really understanding that they are going to disassociate, and they're going to probably ask you to stop talking because they can't carry on the conversation because they're getting tired or something. It's like it's like having a chronic illness almost.
It sounds like it's really emotionally and physically draining.
It physically drains you. Yeah. And if you are in the midst of a BPD episode where someone is in the midst of a rage, like a cycle, like an episode, the worst thing you can do, if you're in public, the worst thing you can do is say, look around, you're embarrassing me, everyone's watching. That, because at one, you're going to make it a lot worse, and two, the person knows that, and they know that, and that embarrassment is going to turn the humiliation into way worse. The second thing, especially if you're a dude, it's very common that if a woman is being hysterical and you're in public, the man isn't going to approach because the audience, the public is going to think that the man is doing something, so they don't want to get in trouble. That's been my experience. So, and which I completely understand. So if you're in that situation, as hard as it is to not help them, you can't help them. You have to set up a boundary. You have to say, I'm here for you, but you can't, because at the end of the day, you don't want anything to happen to yourself.
Yeah. Well, it's also important, I want to point out, you can't force help on anybody. You can make,
and that's what I was going to get to. Yeah.
Well,
and that's the thing too. Yeah, but that's the thing too, because even if you're able to get out away from, because especially when you're in public, they're going to be too hysterical and embarrassed. You're not going to be able. It's best to stay away as long as they're not hurting themselves or others. But if you can get to a place that's private and you're able to actually restrain their arms down in a nice way, just hold them down. Nobody wants to do that, but that's what they need. They need someone to look them in the eyes and say, hey, you're not being yourself right now. I know you're better than this. I know who you really are. They have to feel seen because they don't want to be acting how they're acting right now. They don't want it either. As much as you don't want to have to deal with it, they don't want to be having it. It's embarrassing. So if you can get
draining,
and it's physically draining. Yeah, on the body, it takes a toll. So if you're actually, first thing to do is to further embarrass, to look at them like, oh, I tried to take you somewhere, now you're ruining I can't, that kind of stuff. One, shows that you have no empathy and you're not good at sounding boundaries. You're just a douche. And two, that there's a way to set boundaries, because at the end of the day, BPD is no excuse to treat people like shit. Yeah. So
you should never treat anybody like shit, period.
No. So you also, as a partner or a friend or a family member, someone with BPD, need to set your own boundaries in a way that still allows them to feel seen and not judged.
Which definitely, it makes sense. It sounds like it's a bit of a balancing act and a lot of patience and a lot of understanding. But
it takes a lot of love. It does. Yeah. You have to actually really respect and know that there's a person on the other side of that, but only if they're willing to do it. Because, there's the worst thing. It's like, if you can't accept me at my worst, then you don't deserve me at my best. It's like, bitch, be better. No one should have to accept you at your worst. It's not fair.
Well, people are going to have their best and they're going to have the worst. When you're at your worst, it's still no excuse to be mean or mistreat or be abusive to another human being.
100%. And if and the thing is you can get people who are 37, 30, and they're like, and this is not everyone, but it's just unfortunate to see people not recognize it within themselves. It just sucks. It just sucks, because that's all.
I think that's something that is common across most people. And it's not just people who are just suffering from a mental illness in general. I think it's the fact that people don't want to admit, if they're having a tough time. People don't want to admit, they might be wrong, or something might be, something might not be right. Because I think, especially again in Western society, in the United States specifically, I'm not sure what it's like in, Canadian land. But we're basically taught by our peers, our family, like just our culture here in the United States, that like we have to like always be doing our best. We have to always be working. We have to always be striving for something. Like
Yeah.
if we it's not like flat out said, but it's very heavily implied that if we do something wrong, you're gonna be fucked. You're gonna fuck something up, and then you're gonna be living in a gutter because you put the wrong pencil in the wrong bin, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the people, when it comes to something where it comes to like people's mental health, they're even more timid to even approach going to see a therapist or going to talk to like their friends or family, going, hey, something's not kosher at the moment.
That's definitely big in the culture of the United States, 100%, because that's the whole ideology that the country is founded on. It's like, fuck socialism, you're an individual, support your family or bust.
And also fuck tea,
right?
For some reason.
Yeah, and fuck tea and fuck Boston and just fuck English and I don't know.
Fuck the Red Sox. It's all about the Yankees.
I don't. Oh, I took in Canadian land, as you call it, for some reason. I took American history for fun as an elective.
Right.
So I learned quite a bit. I don't remember much of it, but the main takeaway I did learn from America was they're very big on individualism. You take that away. Take away an American's ability to be an individual and fend for themselves and make more than neighbor. Right.
Yeah.
I was once told by someone from Michigan that I have Detroit hustle, so I can only imagine.
Well, I could definitely see you having like a very like entrepreneurial hustle. Like you got to get stuff done. You're like, what? I have a goal. I'm gonna get this done, kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's good to have with with borderline, it doesn't stop you from doing anything. There, you can be anything you want to be with borderline. You just can't yell at anyone.
Yeah.
Doesn't stop you from living a very grand life. It only hinders it for all of your 20s.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to like recognize everything and work through it, and it sounds like you're definitely in a positive place with yourself, like being aware and finding a way to work through what is part of you.
Oh, and I'll tell, because I wanted to talk about this because I got kind of like carried away. But the one thing, when I turned 25, I was like, I need something to wake up in the morning and be a part of and to have and to claim as my own. And that's why I started Visio Magazine. And that's why I started the AudioViso Podcast. It allows me to have so much joy, and it fills up my day, and it lets me actually have stuff to put into my agenda, because I didn't have any. You can buy, as you have to have a life to fill it up with. So, which is depressing but true. So what do you have to make your life happen? That's what I did. It was stagnant, so I moved it. That
is a good piece of advice in general. It's just you have to build the life that you want. Things don't just like fall into your lap.
No,
like even if like you just happen to be like given something, it's like you have to do something with it.
Oh yeah, no, mental illness falls right the fuck in your lap. I know that.
Yeah.
So much.
It's like, oh look, you're born. Surprise.
Oh, thanks for this little spice of life. But yeah, so I hope that's been sufficient. I hope I wasn't too negative.
No, not at all. I think this is very insightful. The fact that, you're very open, the fact that you're willing to talk about it. I think it's something that, I think this is something that can help a lot of people, especially people who might be feeling, towards us, but not quite understand it. Like hearing your story, hearing what you've gone through, hearing, what you've done to get you where you are now. I think that is very enlightening.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And it's not too descriptive because, again, like everyone with borderline is so different. So there are people who are light years ahead of me and who are younger than me, but it's a personal journey, and it's subjective, and it's how you live it.
I agree with that 100%. So thank you so much for taking the time to share some of your insight.
Thank you for letting me share my insights.
You're welcome. Borderline personality disorder can be such a chaotic force at times, and studies are still trying to understand the full scope of it. So again, I really appreciate the fact that you kind of shared this little slice of like what you have been going through this, at this point in time.
BPD is an unstoppable force, but I am an immovable object. Pretty stubborn, so you can't let it get to you.
I like that. It's that Italian heritage. It's like, nope, not today.
All right, yes, but thanks again, JD. This has been lovely.
You're welcome. Yeah. So I truly believe that the more that we as a society feel comfortable opening up about our struggles, the more it will help others to realize that they are not alone. Everyone has the inner strength to face whatever life puts along their path. So thank you again for taking the time to chat. And thank you to everyone that has been tuning into this episode. If anyone watching finds that they are indeed struggling with their mental health, please don't be afraid to reach out to your friends, to your family, to your colleagues, or more importantly, a mental health professional. I'll have some links in the description of this video that will have some further information and connection to further resources. Until next time, remember that you have the strength to conquer your battlefield.